Hello, guys. So today we're going to talk about lipids. So lipids are anything that's a fat, oil, or a wax. And the main function of this is energy storage. So I know with carbohydrates, we talked about them being for either structure or for energy or fuel. But with lipids, we're also going to have some of those same properties as well due to their massive amount of carbon to carbon bonds. The structural component of lipids that's very, very important is cell membranes and having those membranes be hydrophobic. We also use lipids a lot in our nervous system as well to insulate our nervous system and as well as the endocrine system. So when we think about endocrine system, we're going to think about hormones. So we're looking at different steroids in our bodies. Hormones like testosterone and estrogen are actually lipid based. And the reason for that is that they're very easily able to get in and out of our cells and they're hydrophobic. So with our fats, they have about double the energy of a typical polysaccharide that would be their same size. Plants are going to use starch for energy storage. However, plants also use lipids. So if we think about some different plants that do have fats in them, think avocados or peanuts, almonds, any of like those nuts type of things, those have lipids in them because they're very, very good for long-term energy. So if you think about where those oils and things like that are in the plant, it's in the seeds. So when those seeds are dispersed all over the place, they have long-term energy to feed that growing plant. Fats also cushion your vital organs, and a layer of fat in your body also serves as insulation. So fats are also not strictly polymers. We actually have two different kinds of smaller molecules that go into actually making a fat. So typically when we talk about like monomers of things, the monomer of a carbohydrate would be like a monosaccharide, or for a protein, it would be an amino acid, or for a nucleic acid, it would be a nucleotide. That doesn't 100% hold up for these lipids. What it actually is this glycerol group right here. So we have a glycerol and then fatty acid chains. So because of these hydroxyl groups, once again, functional groups coming in very, very important. Because of those, we do a dehydration synthesis reactions. We're getting rid of theory waters to join them together to make a triglyceride, which is kind of like I think of it like a trident. So it's like a three-pronged molecule. So that structure here, we have a glycerol backbone, and then we have free fatty acids coming off of that. And because of all of these nonpolar CH bonds in this long, long, long hydrocarbon, that makes fats extremely hydrophobic. So if you put like a stick of butter in a jar of water and heat it up, shake it up, it's never going to mix in. It's always going to separate out because of it being hydrophobic. So once again, here's that dehydration synthesis reaction happening. So we have these OH groups. The H comes off of the glycerol, and OH group comes off of that carboxylic acid that is on the end of that fatty acid chain. That's why it's called a fatty acid, because it has that C double bond O with an OH. That comes off to make water, and then very, very, very long fatty acid chain. So typically in diets, we classify fats as two different things. So we can either have saturated fats or unsaturated fats. The only difference is one is saturated with hydrogens. So up at the top here, we see that those carbons are all full of hydrogens because we know carbon always wants four bonds. But if you look down below, all the carbons still have four bonds, but where that little kink is, and this goes along with like functional groups and the 3D shape of everything, we got rid of two of those hydrogens, so created a double bond and a little kink in our molecule, and that's what makes something unsaturated. So now imagine these things in 3D. If we have a saturated fat, they're all straight, so we can stack them really tightly on top of each other. Those types of things are going to be a solid fat. So think butter, lard, a lot of the fat in your body. We typically think of a lot of like animal fats as being saturated fats. And then if we look at the unsaturated fats, those have a little kink in it. So we can't really stack them tightly together. So at room temperature, those things are going to tend to be liquid. So think Plant fats like avocado oil, palm oil, coconut oil, olive oil, all of those different oils are going to be those unsaturated fats. And typically we think of those as being a little bit healthier for us because if you imagine them floating around your bloodstream, unsaturated fats are going to stay liquid in your body, but saturated fats, they stack really, really tightly. And that's what actually like can clog your arteries and create those fat plaques. Okay. So once again, little dichotomy here. We have our saturated fats. So these things are going to be solid at room temperature, typically come from animals linked to heart disease. The unsaturated fats, they have that double bond, which creates a little kink in it. These things are going to be oils at room temperature. They come from plants. The kinks prevent the molecules from tightly packing together. Possibly one of the most important things when we talk about fats is the fact that our cell membranes are made completely of phospholipids. So these phospholipids have just two fatty acids. So our triglycerides have three, make that trident. Here we have just two, and it attaches to a glycerol with a phosphate group at the head. We're going to show you a more detailed picture of that. But if we remember our functional groups, phosphate is very, very polar. So on the outside, this little purple is our phosphate group. It's polar, and that's why it's blue around the water there. Same thing with the other side. The middle of that is very, very hydrophobic. So those hydrophobic ends basically are trying to hide from the water that is completely surrounding that molecule. So up close picture of that phospholipid. So we can see up here, we have that phosphate group, very, very polar. We can see that charged oxygen there. We can also see these fatty acid change. So that's C double bond O. We have a carboxyl group and then our hydrophobic tails down there. Those are going to face each other and then make essentially our cell membranes waterproof. Really, really cool thing that fats do. And fun fact, this is actually how soap works. So when these hydrophobic things are in water, they're going to want to hide from the water. So the way soap works and like a grease fighter works is that that detergent or that soap is going to surround the little bits of grease and like protect it from the water. And then that whole thing gets washed away. And we call that group a micelle, M-I-C-E-L-L-E, a micelle. And that is a single layer of these little phosphates. When we create that phospholipid bilayer, we basically have two micelles, so two, and they come together and make that double layer, which surrounds all of our cells. So a phospholipid bilayer is basically just like a double bagged thing. Okay, there's two layers all around that. So something else that we typically don't think of when we think of lipids is steroids. And the reason why is that these are shaped very, very differently than our other fats we were talking about. So our other lipids that we were talking about are like long chains, whereas steroids, you can see that they have this predictable four rings. So they have all of these carbon rings. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. The part that changes is this part up on top here. So different steroids have different functional groups that attach to these rings. So some different steroids include estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Anything with that sterone at the end is going to be a steroid. The thing that makes it a lipid is the fact that it's only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, so it's only carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. The thing that makes it different from a carbohydrate that's also carbon, hydrogen, oxygen is the fact that it is not in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Okay. Polysaccharides are in a CHO 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Lipids are also just CHO, but they have many, many more C's and H's than they ever will have O's. So functions of these groups, including cholesterol, is to help maintain membrane fluidity. So in our cell membranes, you actually have cholesterol that's in your cell membranes. And we typically think of cholesterol being a bad thing. You can have high cholesterol, but you need some. Otherwise, your cells would be very, very rigid and you wouldn't be able to move all around. So we need to be able to maintain that fluidity, and we do that by adding little cholesterol groups inside of our actual membranes. And a really, really cool fact about this is Arctic fish. You might be thinking, kind of weird, but stay with me. So Arctic fish membranes have a very high amount of cholesterol in them. Otherwise, those fish would freeze in the water that they live in and they wouldn't be able to move. If you have a warm water fish, so think fish that live off the coast of Florida or Gulf of Mexico, they have less cholesterol in their cell membranes because they don't need to have their membranes be as fluid because they live in a warmer climate. So if you would put an Arctic fish in very, very warm water, it's not going to be very, very healthy, and its cell membranes will actually break down quicker. If you put a warm water fish into cold water, the opposite will happen, and it will actually become more rigid and it will die because it won't be able to move just because of the cholesterol that is or is not in their cell membranes. Another part of this is those sex hormones. So we talked about testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. These are all made with that cholesterol base as well, with the only part that changes is that little top group. Sometimes we call an R group because it's literally the rest of the molecule, and it changes with every, like, hormone that we have. So the last part of this is just kind of looking a little bit more at cholesterol. So it's a very, very important steroid component of all animal cell membranes. That's why we typically get cholesterol from eating animal products. Cholesterol is also a precursor to other steroids. So you need cholesterol in order to make other steroids and sex hormones. Very, very high levels of cholesterol, however, can contribute to cardiovascular disease and be very, very unhealthy for your body. So that is our notes today on lipids, and we will be doing our food burning lab in class as well.